this class, I'm going to talk about the anatomy of daffodils. And specifically, I'm going to look at these 4 different cultivars. Daffodils come in as many varieties as you can imagine out there because. So I'll start with, first of all, I want to identify. So this is called Dutch Master. It's an heirloom daffodil. This is called Ice Follies. And these are all early season daffodils. That means that they bloom as early as February and in early March. And this is called Fortune, another heirloom. And then this one's called February Gold because it's the very first daffodil that blooms in my garden. And we're going to dive deep into understanding the anatomy of a daffodil. When you're painting and drawing a daffodil, I think it's important to first understand the basic anatomy of a daffodil, because I think when you understand the anatomy and also the differences between the different cultivars, you have an ability to make your art come across and elevate it more. You are no longer just making a generic representation. Instead, you have elevated your creative endeavor into something unique and special. Kind of think of it as like you're creating a very special portrait of these flowers. That's how I like to think about flower painting and flower drawing. And so let's look at the basic anatomy of all daffodils. All daffodils have a corona. That's this trumpet part of the flower. So all daffodils have a corona, which is the trumpet, or like I like to call it, the nose of the flower. All daffodils have a corona, the trumpet shape of the central part of the flower. Inside the flower, you have a stigma, which is the item that points out the farthest. And then you have a whole bunch of stamens. When I say a whole bunch, it's usually 6 that are inside of it. And they can either be tied up to the stigma, like in this Dutch Master, or they can be like this flower where they have the stigma, the stamens have separated out. And then there's the stigma, again, the corona. And then all daffodils have 6 petals. And the petals are in 2 groups of 3. I like to think of them as an equilateral triangle of 1, 2, 3. And then these are the forward petals. And then you have another set of 1, 2, 3, which are the petals that are in the back. And then you have like the back part of the flower. This is the ovary, but like we're artists, we're not botanists, or so we don't need this tissue, brown tissue paper quality piece is what covers the bud of the flower. And that is called the spathe. And then you have this little bit of part right here of your stem, which is called the neck. And then you actually have the stem of the flower. And I want you to look at do you see how the stem it's got 2 edges that are pretty rigid, and then it actually twists and kind of turns, and that gives the flowers structural rigidity, because otherwise they would fall down probably very easily, because March, April are pretty windy months. Okay, so let's diagrammatically look and look at the anatomy of a flower. And so what I want to point out is that all flowers, all daffodils, I like to always think about them as when you first start thinking about how to draw one and how to organize your thoughts around the flowers, look for these landmarks of the 2 equilateral triangles of the flower. And within that equilateral triangle is your corona, which often also follows the inside polygon that's created from those 2 equilateral triangles that come in. And that is if you're looking straight on at the daffodil. When I start a drawing, I always look at I find the equilateral triangles points essentially. And within that equilateral triangle, then I know that the polygonal shape of the corona is reinforced as well. But what's interesting is, or I find it interesting, is that where the corona, the trumpet shape, meets up with the six petals, that polygonal shape, six-sided polygon, gets reinforced and drawn. And so daffodils are so fun because they are geometry in nature. They are, the beauty of geometry found in nature. And like you can see from the back, you can see the 1, 2, 3, the equilateral triangle there with the petals that are outside. And they tend to be a little bit fatter than the 3 petals that are inside. And then, so you've got 1, 2, 3, and then you've got 1, 2, 3. I just find it so fascinating. And so with that, that's how I'm always thinking about and drawing as best I can. So when I think about the shape, I'm always looking for my underlying geometrical shape. And so I know that the center, where the stigma is in alignment with, and if I did a cross section, it would align with, it would go straight through to like the center point here of the center point of where the flower meets the ovaries. And so you can always use the geometry of a daffodil to help you out for drawing. And I like to, so I've got my stigma, and then you can even, so there's often 6 stamen that either hold up really tight to the stigma, or they splay out like that flower, like that one does right there. You've got the corona, which most of them have frills. Some are more frilly than others. So you've got your corona edge. This is a front petal, front petal, front petal, and then you'll have your back petal as well. And then let's look at it in profile. Depending on what type of daffodil you have, because you've got some that are small cupped, and then you have some that are big cupped but are really wide, and the trumpet aspect of the daffodil is really kind of on the small side. And then you have a daffodil like this. This one is considered, it's called a cyclamen because all of the petals fold back, and then that trumpet comes forward, and then you've got the space. So let's do a side. Let's also look at the anatomy if we did a side profile. And so I often like to think again the geometry. So you've got a stem, you've got the neck. For drawing, it's just fun to identify the textures, but if you're going to be painting it, I also like to pay attention to the anatomy shifts, so that way I can really capture the difference in color. So, okay, I've got and then you've got the space. And then like in behind here is an ovary, and then like if I wanted to, there's a central line that always demarcates that flower. And then from that ovary, you've got the flower comes out, and then you have the petals that come out. And then what's interesting is this continuation is often the continuation of the corona too. And depending on what type of flower it is, it will either roll out like a Dutch master, or it will stay and just kind of sort of splay out, but not much. So depending on what you're painting in daffodils, it's kind of a good idea to know. And then like also you'll have the polygonal shape of how the daffodils petals work. So we'll have, and then this is a behind one. And then we'll have one that comes forward. And then we'll have another behind one. And then there'll be another behind one here. And then this one probably will be forward. And then so when we're looking at the side, there is it's no longer an equilateral triangle. It becomes typically, I forget the name of it, but where essentially two sides of your triangle tend to be similar in length. And then there's you still have those intersecting triangles working on top of your flower.